Hey everyone, my name is Darby and I work in Incubation Engineering at GitLab. Today is November 1st, 2021, and this is the DevOps for Mobile Apps demo. So I've got the issue here that I create with each one of these updates each week, and you'll see a link to this issue in the video description below as well. The first thing we've got here is a link to our mission. So this is what is this group all about? This is about making the experience better for developers building mobile apps on GitLab. And I've got a link to our handbook page and then our weekly demos issue here too, so you can catch up on all the previous versions of this update. So getting into this week's update, focus this week was on code signing and beta releases with Fastlane, and mostly focused on iOS, on the iOS side of that. So what we've got here in these first couple links is a successful pipeline, so a functional pipeline that builds the app and then releases it to test flight in the App Store. And then I've got an example of the pipeline here as well. So I will get into kind of how all this works in a second, but I want to talk about a couple of the components that we're using to make this all work. So the first thing is going to be Fastlane Match. So this is a component of the Fastlane project. It's one of the tools that comes with it. And from the website, it's described as a new approach to iOS and macOS code signing. And you basically are setting up a shared resource for your provisioning profiles and your certificates that then can be shared across your team. This is going to make a lot of sense for teams using GitLab to collaborate and build this process out. There's most likely more than one developer building those apps. So it also works fine for a single developer building an app, but there's a little more work to getting it set up, as you might imagine. So there's a couple of links here that I added. The first one is just a link to the documentation of Match. And the second here is this website, codesigning.guide, which talks a lot about the whole sort of philosophy behind this approach, some of the challenges, some of the risks, and just sort of like goes into detail on a lot of that. So this is a nice resource to take a read through if you want to get more into the details of how it all works. But kind of at a high level, what it does is it gives you this project. So there's multiple different kinds of backends you can use for this. You can use Git, or you can use like object storage. So in Google Cloud or AWS or something like that. And it supports both of those. For us, obviously, it made a lot of sense to use Git, which is kind of the preferred mechanism as well. And what you get with that implementation is a separate Git project. So a separate project in GitLab that is a private project. And this actually stores all of your certificates and provisioning profiles. And so this is the project here for this app. And you can see in here under profiles, we have a development profile and an App Store profile. So the development one is going to be the one that we use for just testing the app locally on devices. And then the App Store would be for test flight or for actual like App Store distribution to users. The big difference between those is that the development profiles are limited in the number of, are limited in the devices that they can be provisioned to. So you have to configure your devices, device IDs for the development certificates. For the App Store profiles, these are open to any device. And that gets controlled either through test flight or through the App Store of, purchasing the app or whatever that might be. So that's what that looks like. And you can see there's also certificates here as well. So with this set up, then you basically hook this into the process, and then this is where the match process gets all of its data from. The other part of this as well is that there is a match password that is used to encrypt the data within the Git repository. So it's not just plain text, unsecured data there, so there's actually a little bit of extra security on that. And then I've linked to the match file here so you can see what this looks like. And there's just a couple lines in here. We basically configure the Git URL, the storage model, so this would be Git or object storage, and then the default. So the default in here is development. Otherwise, we would override it with App Store or one of the other provisioning types if we were doing that. So from there, so that's kind of an overview of Match. The next kind of component that I want to talk about is the App Store Connect API. So this is an API that's provided by Apple to make it easier to interact with the App Store through a CI service or through an API, essentially. So there's a link here to the documentation, and then there is also this blog post that talks about how to set it up. It's actually a little complicated, but basically you go through this process and you end up with a few different environment variables that you set in your CI configuration. And so those are listed here: the issuer ID, the key ID, and then the actual key. And what this allows us to do then is to not be tied to a specific user's account to do the interactions with the App Store. And then it also gets us around the two-factor authentication that is also required in that setup. So with this, you can basically script it, and then you don't have to interact with the tools at all to do the code signing, the building, and the deployment and stuff like that. So that's what the App Store Connect API does. So then down here, I've got some details on how this beta deploy process works. So I've got the step in the GitLab CI file, and then the fast file here, which is the Fastlane part of it. So I'll walk through these 2 bits. So basically in here we've got a Mac OS runner, and then we have to set up a bunch of things, and I think this can be streamlined quite a bit, but basically we're upgrading Flutter, running bundle install, and installing some other dependencies. I think we can speed that up with some caching and maybe more of a customized Docker image for this, but I need to spend a little more time digging into that. And then this step here is we're actually building the app, so we're running the Flutter build command, and then this is actually where we also pass in our a couple environment variables that we need to set within the app build. So we have a API key for YouTube for this particular app, and then a channel ID as well. So we set those as part of the build, and then we jump down here to the Fastlane command. Now, what actually happens here is we're actually building the app twice, which is not great. I want to fix that, so I'm going to work on that this week. But I think there's a way to sort of combine these two into one step. Obviously, it's not efficient to build the app twice, but there's some bit of information that's not getting built in the secondary build step that was preventing the app from working. So that's the CI configuration. Ideally, what we would end up with here is just like a bundle install, a pod install, and then a Fastlane build or Fastlane beta. But there's just a few other steps that I need to clean up in here. So we'll get to that as we can. And then, so down here in the Fastlane file, this is kind of where the magic of all of this happens. So there's several commands in here, and I'll kind of talk through what each of these is doing. The first one is setup CI. So setup CI, this is kind of a special feature of Fastlane that is used in this context to create a temporary keychain on the Mac runner, and then it also sets Match into read-only mode. So you could imagine a case where if Match was not in read-only mode, then your CI system could be overwriting your certificates in your Git repo, and you wouldn't want that to happen. So it kind of sets up Match for this specific use case. Then the next step here is actually running the Match command, and this is where we set the type to App Store. If you remember before, it was defaulted to development, so this is where we say we want to use the App Store provisioning profiles and certificates. And what this step does is it basically goes out to that Git repo and pulls down those certificates so that they can be used in later steps in this process. And that sort of like scopes it to the type of distribution that we're building. The next step here is the App Store Connect API key is the name of the function. Basically what this does is it loads those environment variables and configures the Fastlane process to use that as its mechanism to interact with the App Store. And then there's just this is a configuration option. The key is base64 encoded. This makes it easier to set that as an environment variable in GitLab. So just base64 and key at base 64 encode that key. The next couple commands here are kind of more of a Flutter thing, but I kind of like the way that this works, so I set it up this way. Basically, when you're doing these builds, you want to have unique build numbers or version numbers for each one that you release. And Flutter has a mechanism by which you set the version of the app within the pub/spec file. And so you can configure that, and then these functions here will flow that numbering scheme through to the rest of the iOS app. And so what this is doing is it's using this increment version number command to update the version number and the build number within the iOS app. And then it's just calling these attributes from the Flutter pub/spec file. So it basically looks that up and says, okay, I need to get the version number from here, and that's the source of truth for the version number. And then it pulls that into the iOS build. This would work probably the same for Android. We'll test that this week. But that's kind of what that's all about. There's other ways to do this too, where you can just like auto increment the number. You can go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. And that would work fine too for this use case. Next step is just to build the app. So this is where we compile it. So we're going to be building the app with the given build number and the provisioning profile that we got from Match up here. And so that's going to create that version of the app for distribution to the App Store, and in our case, specifically TestFlight. And then the last step here is really just uploading that. So that's going to go take that build, and it's going to upload it to TestFlight, and it's going to use the App Store API key that we had set up here in this step. So from there, that's it. Then once it hits TestFlight, then it gets distributed out to all of the beta users, and they can download the new version and install it on their phones. I've tested this several times, and it works really well. And so it's cool to see that whole process work. So down here in the notes, I've also included links to each of these steps, so you can kind of see where the documentation is at. And then this is the Flutter version plugin that I'm using to get that version number. And then I put a note down here. This one kind of like confused me a little bit. We need to actually create a distribution certificate, and that's done on the local machine and uploaded to the App Store or the developer Apple portal. And this is just some instructions on how to do that. So then down here, I've created a couple issues already, but I want to add to this as we go. I think there's several opportunities for us to contribute to Fastlane. And I think these are some of the ideas I have here. The one that I wanted to call out is the match file. So in the match file that I set up, there is, so this is where we set the Git URL. Right here, this is how I'm going to authenticate that repo from my GitLab runner. So we got our CI job token here, which is going to give us access to that GitLab project, but it's not automatically added into this. So I have to do a little bit of configuration here. And then the downside is like, if this is not set locally, then Match is not going to work locally for me. So I have to kind of toggle between these two configurations. I think there would be an easy way to sort of hook into this and make it automatic. So if you're using GitLab CI, then we just try to add this CI job token here as part of that configuration. So that's something I want to look at, but it's those type of things that I think we can add into Fastlane to make this a lot easier to work with. So that's kind of the main bits here. I found a lot of resources while I was kind of working through this week, so I just kind of captured some links here about Flutter. This is just some various documentation, and then a few other details on Fastlane, kind of for future reference, but in case anyone else wanted to see what I was looking at there. So then up next, really the focus for this week is going to be on improving that build process and fixing the double compile problem in that beta release step, and then I want to also work on the Android version of this. So getting a whole release pipeline to the Play Store and get that out to beta users. We have several beta users on both of the apps now, so it's nice to get feedback from them, and they can let us know when things work and when they don't. So we're sort of like starting to early dog food this, and that's working really well. So that's it for this week. Please check out the issue, check out, provide any feedback you have, or just let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, I will see you next time. Thanks.